You have been lied to. For years, the modern self-improvement industry has sold you a comforting, yet utterly paralyzing illusion. They tell you that if you stand in front of a mirror and repeat positive affirmations, if you just tell yourself you are strong, confident, and untouchable, your reality will magically shift. But let us look at the facts. Look at your life. Has it worked? Or do you still feel the same hollow anxiety creeping in the moment you step into a room full of people? The uncomfortable reality is, you cannot deceive your own subconscious mind. Carl Jung, the legendary Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the darkest, most hidden corners of the human psyche, understood a terrifying truth about human nature. He knew that the voice in your head does not merely dictate your mood. It constructs your absolute reality. And more dangerously, it broadcasts your internal hierarchy to every single person you interact with, long before you ever open your mouth to speak. We like to believe that our self-talk is a private, isolated conversation safely locked away behind our skulls. It is not. It is a loud, continuous broadcast. Human beings are primal creatures, wired by millions of years of evolution to subconsciously detect weakness, insecurity, and submissiveness. When you step into a room, people do not read your expensive clothes or your forced smile. They read the micro-expressions on your face, the tension in your jaw, the exact pacing of your breath, and the precise amount of space you dare to occupy. These silent psychological signals are the direct physical manifestation of how you speak to yourself in the dark. If your internal dialogue is that of a victim, if you secretly negotiate with your own boundaries, if you constantly apologize for your own existence, in your mind, the world will smell the blood in the water. People will treat you exactly as you have silently instructed them to. Jung famously stated, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Your current fate, the respect you lack, the boundaries people cross. The quiet desperation you feel is simply a reflection of your unconscious, submissive self-talk. You are not a victim of circumstance. You are a victim of your own internal negotiations." Most people walk through life apologizing to their own shadow. They say, "I hope I don't fail," or "Why does this always happen to me?" This is the language of the prey. Jung knew that to integrate the shadow, one must speak the language of the predator, not to harm others, but to protect the self from the relentless encroachment of a world that preys on the weak. When you replace "I hope" with "I will" and "Why me" with "Test me," the neurological pathways in your brain literally rewire. You stop leaking energy and start storing it. To change your life, you must stop treating your mind like a fragile child that needs coddling with fake positivity. You must start speaking to it with the cold, unyielding authority of a sovereign. This is not about being cruel to yourself. It is about establishing a ruthless standard of truth. You must kill the negotiator inside your head. The moment your internal narrative shifts from defense to absolute, stoic authority, your external reality has no choice but to warp and mold itself to match. And it begins with understanding the darkest, most potent tool at your disposal. Watch a crowded room. Pay close attention to the one who is speaking the loudest, the one frantically waving their hands, desperate to hold the attention of the group. This person is not displaying power. They are displaying a fatal psychological leak. They are bleeding validation. Their internal dialogue is so fractured, so plagued by insecurity, that they must constantly beg the external world to confirm their existence. When you master the way you speak to yourself, when you establish that cold, internal authority, the very first casualty is your need to over-explain. Over-explaining is the ultimate signature of the weak. Every time you justify your decisions to someone who hasn't earned the right to question them, every time you fill a heavy silence with nervous chatter, you are subconsciously signaling to the other person, "I do not trust my own judgment. Please validate me. You are handing them the keys to your psychological fortress, inviting them to invade, judge, and control you. Now, compare that to the sheer magnetic power of deliberate restraint. History repeatedly shows that the most formidable individuals, the ones who leave an undeniable mark on the world, are those who guard their words as if they were a finite, depleting resource. When you stop broadcasting your every thought, you begin to gather the most valuable currency in human interaction: information. Human nature absolutely abhors a vacuum. When you deploy strategic silence, the people around you will inevitably rush to fill it. The discomfort of an unanswered pause is too much for an undisciplined mind to bear. In their frantic attempt to bridge the gap, they will talk. And as they talk, they will spill their secrets, their underlying insecurities, and their hidden motives. They will show you exactly who they are and how to navigate them, simply because you had the stoic discipline to keep your mouth shut. Silence forces projection. When you offer no frantic explanations, people are forced to project their own psychological states onto your quiet demeanor. The insecure will view your silence as quiet judgment. The manipulative will view it as a dangerous threat. The wise will view it as an unshakable power. You become a psychological mirror, reflecting their own flaws back at them, while revealing absolutely nothing of yourself. This physical restraint begins entirely with your internal monologue. If you are constantly negotiating with your own self-worth in the dark, you will instinctively negotiate with others in the light. But if your internal voice dictates, "My reality requires no defense," your external behavior becomes utterly impenetrable. You stop trying to convince people of your intelligence, your worth, or your boundaries. You simply embody them. Think of the shadow self, the repressed, primal aspects of your psyche that Carl Jung spoke of. The shadow does not beg to be understood. It does not explain its existence to the conscious mind. It simply operates, grounded in undeniable, silent reality. By integrating this quiet, primal confidence into your daily self-talk, you cultivate an aura of profound mystery. You transform into a blank canvas. People cannot manipulate what they cannot understand. When they do not know what you are thinking, they cannot predict your next move, and unpredictability is the bedrock of total social autonomy. From this day forward, tell yourself this: I owe no one an explanation for my existence. Speak only when it improves upon the silence. Let your presence be heavy, deliberate, and entirely self-contained. Your internal dialogue has silenced the need for validation. You are quiet, you are observing, but the world will not simply leave you alone because you have stopped speaking. Human nature is fundamentally probing. People will inevitably test the structural integrity of your newly built psychological fortress. And this brings us to the true, unyielding test of boundaries. There is a devastating misconception that a boundary is something you communicate. People believe that if they simply state their limits, if they say, "Do not speak to me like that," or "I will not tolerate this," they are projecting strength. The uncomfortable reality is, a spoken boundary is nothing more than a desperate plea. It is a request for the other person to change their behavior so that you do not have to change yours. When you announce your boundaries, you are still playing the victim's game. You are relying on the moral compass of the very person who is actively disrespecting you. History repeatedly shows that human beings do not respect your declarations. They respect your tolerances. Disrespect is rarely a sudden, violent explosion. It is a methodical, insidious creep. People test your limits gradually. It starts with a slightly delayed response, a backhanded compliment wrapped in a joke, a minor broken promise, or a subtle change in tone. They are dropping a pebble into your psychological waters to see how large the ripples get. If you respond by explaining why you are hurt, if you argue, or if you simply absorb the slight to keep the peace, you have failed the test. You have just signaled that your territory can be invaded without consequence. Carl Jung understood that to survive the darkness of human nature, you must integrate your own capacity for ruthlessness. This is not about violence or malice. It is about the absolute cold willingness to enforce consequences without hesitation. A true master of their own mind does not negotiate respect. They mandate it through action. When someone crosses a line, you do not sit them down and explain their infraction. You do not reward their disrespect with your emotional energy or your precious time. You withdraw. You remove your presence. You walk away. Calm, consequence-driven action is the most terrifying response to a manipulator. When you simply sever access to yourself without a drop of anger, you strip them of all their power. They wanted an emotional reaction. You gave them a void. They wanted a negotiation. You gave them a final, unspoken verdict. This requires an internal voice that is completely detached from the fear of loss. If your self-talk constantly whispers, "What if they leave me?" or "What if they get angry?" you will forever be a prisoner to the whims of others. You must reprogram that internal voice to say, "My peace is expensive, and you can no longer afford it." The ultimate respect is never commanded by how loudly you can shout your limits. It is commanded by how swiftly and silently you are willing to walk away from anyone who fails to honor them. Once you prove that your absence is the immediate, non-negotiable consequence of their disrespect, people will handle you with the utmost care. But to execute this flawlessly, you must first master the most volatile force within yourself. The most fatal vulnerability a human being possesses is not physical weakness. It is emotional predictability. When you allow your internal state to be dictated by external forces, you are not a free individual. You are a psychological puppet, and you have willingly handed the strings over to anyone who wishes to pull them. Understanding human nature requires accepting a deeply uncomfortable truth. People will intentionally try to trigger you. They will throw veiled insults, orchestrate high-pressure situations, or act with blatant disrespect, specifically to test the structural integrity of your emotional control. Why? Because the moment you react emotionally, you surrender your leverage. The uncomfortable reality is, an emotional reaction is the ultimate form of submission. When someone disrespects you and you instantly snap back in anger or scramble to defend yourself, you are broadcasting a clear message. Your words have the power to alter my reality. You control my nervous system. You have validated their attack. You have shown them exactly where your psychological buttons are hidden, and you can be absolutely certain they will press them again whenever they need to dominate the dynamic. Now, compare that to the devastating, almost terrifying power of absolute emotional mastery. The true sovereign of the mind does not suppress emotion. They observe it from a cold, detached distance. When the external world attempts to inject chaos into their psyche, their internal dialogue does not panic. It does not look for a way to fight back. It simply whispers, "Look at them. Look at how desperately they need a reaction from me." To be triggered is to be controlled. To pause is to become completely untouchable. When you are placed under extreme pressure, or when an insult is hurled your way, the most formidable maneuver you can execute is absolutely nothing. You pause. You hold steady, unblinking eye contact. You let their insult hang suspended in the dead air of the room. In that agonizing, stretched-out silence, the power dynamic violently shifts. The attacker, who was banking on a defensive scramble or a fiery outburst, is suddenly met with a psychological void. They instantly realize their weapon has failed. You did not bite the hook. This is where your new internal dialogue executes its most critical function. While they are squirming in the uncomfortable silence you just created, your mind is not racing. It is anchored. You are silently repeating the Stoic command. I dictate the tempo of this reality. I decide if you are worthy of my energy. This pause makes you radically unpredictable, and unpredictability is the bane of the manipulator. A manipulator relies on a simple equation. Action A, the insult guarantees reaction B, your anger. When you completely withhold reaction B, their entire formula collapses. They do not know if you are quietly plotting their ruin, if you simply pity their lack of tact, or if you do not even register their existence as a threat. You become a black box. History repeatedly shows that those who cannot be read cannot be conquered. By mastering your internal dialogue, you sever the neurological link between external stimulus and internal response. You stop acting as a reactionary participant in their pathetic games and assume your rightful place as the silent, untouchable observer. Your stoic calm becomes a mirror, reflecting their own desperate, childish need for control back onto them. They will unravel while you remain perfectly still. But emotional mastery is only your shield. To forge the sword to ensure your perceived value is permanently etched into the minds of everyone you meet. You must understand the final psychological law of human nature. The most fundamental law of global economics is identical to the most brutal law of human psychology. Abundance breeds indifference, while scarcity commands immense value. If your internal dialogue is plagued by the fear of missing out or the desperate need to be liked, you will instinctively make yourself constantly available. You will reply to messages instantly. You will show up to every pointless gathering. You will endlessly pour your energy into people who offer absolutely nothing in return. The uncomfortable reality is, over-accessibility is the absolute death of respect. Human beings are fundamentally incapable of valuing what they can have at any given moment without effort. We trample over stones because they are everywhere, yet men will ruin themselves to unearth a single diamond precisely because it is buried, rare, and difficult to obtain. Now, compare that desperate availability to the psychology of a sovereign mind. When you finally align your internal self-talk with a standard of ruthless self-respect, when you genuinely tell yourself, my time is sacred, and my presence must be earned, your entire behavioral matrix shifts. You no longer have to fake being busy. Your mental energy is simply too valuable to waste on trivialities. You stop answering texts the second they arrive. You excuse yourself from conversations that offer no intellectual or strategic value. You let the phone ring. You become perfectly comfortable with the heavy power of your own absence. This is not a petty, manipulative trick. It is the natural consequence of genuinely valuing your own existence. History repeatedly shows that the leaders, thinkers, and strategists who command the highest levels of societal reverence are those whose presence is strictly regulated. By aggressively controlling your availability, you force the external world to invest active effort simply to interact with you. Psychological studies confirm that humans obsessively rationalize their investments. The more effort someone has to expend to capture your attention, the more profoundly they will value you once they have it. Over time, this consistent, unyielding protection of your energy constructs the ultimate psychological armor, an undeniable reputation. Your reputation is not what people politely say to your face. It is the unspoken, collective consensus they whisper when you leave the room. When your actions consistently prove that you are emotionally untouchable, completely self-validated, and fiercely protective of your time, your reputation begins to enter rooms long before you do. People will begin to unconsciously adjust their posture, filter their words, and raise their own standards merely in anticipation of your arrival. They will respect your boundaries before you even have to enforce them, all because your silent, consistent actions have trained them to do so. Carl Jung warned us that to remain oblivious to the unconscious mind is to be dragged through life by invisible chains, calling it fate. For years, you have allowed the weak, apologetic, and fearful fragments of your psyche to dictate your internal narrative. You have negotiated your worth with a world that loves to prey on the insecure. It is time to permanently end the negotiation. You must kill the victim inside your head and resurrect the sovereign. Change the exact words you speak to yourself in the silence of your own mind, and you will render yourself utterly untouchable in the harsh light of reality. The external world is nothing but a massive, shifting mirror, waiting for you to definitively decide who you are. Tell yourself, you are the architect of your fate. Move through the world with the cold, deliberate restraint of a master, and watch as reality itself bows to your quiet command.